Jonathan Hayes was not your typical CEO. While most executives spent their days locked away in glass-walled offices or attending high-profile meetings, Jonathan preferred to stay grounded. He believed that understanding the inner workings of his company was key to its success. Apex Industries, a manufacturing giant based in Chicago, had grown rapidly under his leadership. But lately, something felt off. Reports from the outskirts warehouse were troubling. Inventory counts didn't match up, productivity was down, and employee turnover had spiked. Rather than sending someone else to investigate, Jonathan decided to take matters into his own hands. He came up with a plan: go undercover as an ordinary employee. For this mission, he would become Jack Miller, an inventory auditor sent to inspect the warehouse operations. It wasn't the first time Jonathan had gone undercover, but it was definitely the riskiest. If anyone found out who he really was, it could ruin everything. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something serious was happening at the warehouse, and he needed to see it for himself. The morning of his arrival, Jonathan stood outside the massive warehouse building. It loomed before him like a fortress, its walls made of dull gray metal and dotted with small windows. Trucks rumbled in and out of the loading bays, their engines growling loudly. Workers hurried back and forth, some pushing heavy carts loaded with boxes, others shouting instructions into walkie-talkies. Jonathan took a deep breath and adjusted the baseball cap on his head. Underneath his plain blue shirt and khaki pants, he carried a fake ID badge clipped to his belt. On his shoulder hung a worn-out messenger bag containing a notebook, pen, and a few printed documents to make his cover more convincing. Most importantly, he clutched a clipboard tightly in his hands, the universal symbol of authority in any workplace. As he approached the main entrance, a young woman greeted him. She looked frazzled but friendly, her blonde hair tied back in a messy ponytail. Her name tag read, Lisa Carter, Shift Supervisor. "Hi there," she said with a tired smile. "You must be Jack Miller. I've been told you're here to do an audit?" "That's right," Jonathan replied, keeping his voice steady. "Just need to check some numbers and make sure everything's running smoothly." "Well, good luck with that," Lisa muttered, under her breath, though Jonathan caught it anyway. Before he could ask what she meant, she motioned for him to follow her inside. The air inside the warehouse hit him immediately. It was cool and dry, carrying the faint smell of cardboard and machine oil. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh white glow across endless rows of shelves stacked high with boxes. Forklifts beeped as they maneuvered through narrow aisles, and the sound of voices echoed off the walls. Lisa gave him a quick tour, pointing out different sections of the warehouse. There was the receiving area where shipments arrived, the sorting zone where products were organized, and finally, the storage racks where finished goods awaited distribution. As they walked, Jonathan noticed the tension among the workers. Some moved quickly, heads down, avoiding eye contact. Others seemed frustrated, muttering complaints to each other when they thought no one was listening. Lisa kept glancing over, her shoulder nervously, as if expecting trouble at any moment. "So, how long have you worked here?" Jonathan asked casually, trying to break the ice. "About 3 years," Lisa replied. "It used to be a pretty decent place to work. Lately, though." She trailed off, shaking her head. "What's changed?" Jonathan pressed gently. Before Lisa could answer, a loud voice cut through the noise. "Carter, what are you doing? Wasting time giving tours? Get back to work." Jonathan turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man striding toward them. He wore a bright yellow safety vest and had a clipboard tucked under one arm. His face was red, and his expression was anything but welcoming. This, Jonathan assumed, was Carl Dawson, the foreman everyone had warned him about. "Sorry, Mr. Dawson," Lisa stammered, taking a step back. "I was just showing Mr. Miller around so he can start the audit." Carl narrowed his eyes at Jonathan, sizing him up. "Audit? What kind of audit?" "Inventory," Jonathan said smoothly, meeting Carl's gaze without flinching. "Corporate wants to make sure we're staying on top of things." Carl grunted, clearly unimpressed. "Fine, but don't get in the way. We've got work to do." With that, he spun on his heel and marched off, barking orders at a nearby worker. Once Carl was out of earshot, Lisa let out a sigh of relief. Sorry about him, she whispered. He's intense. Jonathan nodded, filing the information away. No problem. Thanks for the tour. I'll get started now. For the rest of the day, Jonathan immersed himself in the routine of the warehouse. He wandered through the aisles, jotting down notes and pretending to examine inventory records. Along the way, he struck up conversations with various employees, asking questions about their jobs and listening carefully to their responses. Many of them spoke cautiously, glancing around to ensure no one was eavesdropping. A few shared stories of late-night shifts and missed family dinners, while others mentioned Carl's constant threats and unreasonable demands. One conversation stood out in particular. Near the end of his shift, Jonathan found himself standing next to a young man stacking boxes onto a pallet. The guy looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes making him appear older than he probably was. "You okay?" Jonathan asked quietly. The man glanced up, startled. "Yeah, I'm fine, just tired." "Long hours?" "Yeah. Double shifts every week. Gotta pay the bills, you know." The man hesitated, then added, "Name's Kevin, by the way." "Nice to meet you, Kevin. I'm Jack." They chatted briefly, and Kevin mentioned that his mom was sick, which explained why he was working so hard. Jonathan felt a pang of sympathy, but reminded himself to stay focused. Every piece of information he gathered brought him closer to uncovering the truth about the warehouse and about Carl Dawson. By the time his shift ended, Jonathan's feet ached and his mind was racing. The warehouse was far worse than he'd imagined. The workers were overworked, stressed, and scared. And Carl? He was a bully, plain and simple. But proving it wouldn't be easy. Jonathan knew he had to tread carefully if he wanted to expose the corruption without blowing his cover. As he drove home that night, Jonathan couldn't help but think about the people he'd met. Kevin, Lisa, and countless others were counting on him, even if they didn't realize it yet. Whatever happened next, he vowed to do whatever it took to fix the mess at the warehouse. After all, it wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It was about real people, and their lives depended on getting this right. The next morning, Jonathan returned to the warehouse feeling more determined than ever. He knew he couldn't fix everything overnight, but every day brought new opportunities to gather information and to understand the people who worked there. As he clocked in, Lisa greeted him with a nod and handed him a schedule for the day. "Today's going to be busy," she said, her tone clipped. "Carl's been breathing down everyone's neck since yesterday." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "What happened?" Lisa hesitated before answering. "He found out someone left early last night. Now he's making everyone pay for it." With that ominous warning, Jonathan headed into the warehouse. The atmosphere felt heavier today, almost suffocating. Workers moved faster, their faces tense, as they tried to stay ahead of Carl's sharp gaze. Forklifts zoomed by dangerously close, and the constant hum of machinery seemed louder than usual. Jonathan kept his clipboard close, using it as both a prop and a shield as he navigated the chaos. It didn't take long for Carl to make an appearance. True to Lisa's word, he was in rare form, barking orders left and right. Jonathan watched as Carl singled out Kevin, the young man he'd spoken to the previous evening. Kevin was struggling to keep up with his task of stacking heavy crates onto a pallet. His movements were slow and clumsy, and sweat dripped from his forehead despite the cool air inside the building. "Hey, what's wrong with you?" Carl shouted, storming over to Kevin. "Pick up the pace or I'll find someone who can." Kevin flinched but didn't stop working. "I'm doing my best, Mr. Dawson. These crates are really heavy." "Your best isn't good enough," Carl snapped. "If you can't handle it, maybe you shouldn't be here." Jonathan clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to intervene. He reminded himself that blowing his cover now would only make things worse. Instead, he pretended to focus on his clipboard, scribbling notes furiously while keeping one ear tuned to the confrontation. "I've got double shifts all week," Kevin muttered, his voice barely audible. "My mom's sick and I need the money." "You think I care about your sob story?" Carl interrupted, his face turning red. "This is a business, not a charity. Either shape up or ship out." Kevin lowered his head, defeated. Without another word, he resumed stacking crates, though his hands trembled visibly. Jonathan's heart sank as he realized how powerless Kevin, and likely many others, felt under Carl's rule. It wasn't just poor management, it was outright cruelty. Later, that afternoon, Jonathan decided to dig deeper. During a short break, he approached Kevin cautiously. The younger man sat alone on a stack of empty pallets, staring at the floor. Up close, Jonathan could see the exhaustion etched into his features. "Hey, Kevin," he said softly. "Mind if I join you?" Kevin looked up, startled. "Oh, hey, Jack, sure." Jonathan sat down beside him, careful not to seem too intrusive. "How's it going?" Kevin sighed deeply. "Honestly, not great. Carl's been riding me hard lately. Says I'm not pulling my weight." "That doesn't sound fair," Jonathan replied. "From what I've seen, you're working harder than most people here." "It doesn't matter," Kevin said bitterly. "Carl doesn't care. He just wants us scared enough to do whatever he says." Curiosity got the better of Jonathan. "Has he always been like this?" Kevin shook his head. "Not at first. When I started, he was tough but reasonable. But over the past year, he's gotten worse. People quit all the time because of him. Some even had breakdowns. No one complains, though. They're afraid of losing their jobs." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think anyone else might feel the same way? Like maybe we could talk to them together?" Kevin hesitated, glancing around nervously. "I don't know. Most people are too scared to say anything, but maybe Lisa would help. She hates Carl as much as the rest of us." That gave Jonathan an idea. If he could get Lisa on board, she might be able to connect him with other employees willing to share their experiences. Together, they could build a stronger case against Carl. After his conversation with Kevin, Jonathan sought out Lisa during her lunch break. She was sitting in the corner of the break room, picking at a sandwich without much enthusiasm. When Jonathan approached, she looked up warily. "What's up, Jack?" she asked. "I wanted to ask you something," Jonathan began, lowering his voice. "Is there anyone else here who feels the way Kevin does about Carl?" Lisa frowned. "Why, do you want to know?" Jonathan chose his words carefully. "Because I think there's more going on here than missing inventory. People are unhappy, and that affects productivity. If we can figure out why, maybe we can fix it." For a moment, Lisa said nothing. Then slowly she nodded. "You're right. Things have been bad for a while. But no one talks about it because they're afraid of retaliation. Would you be willing to introduce me to some of them?" Jonathan pressed gently. "Off the record, of course." Lisa hesitated again, clearly torn. Finally, she sighed. "All right. But we have to be careful. If Carl finds out, it won't end well for any of us." Over the next few days, Jonathan met with several employees, each sharing their own stories of Carl's abuse. One woman, Sarah, recounted how Carl had mocked her when she returned from medical leave after recovering from pneumonia. Another worker, Mike, described how Carl falsified attendance records to justify firing someone who called in sick too often. The more Jonathan heard, the angrier he became. This wasn't just mismanagement. It was systemic bullying, disguised as leadership. Still, Jonathan knew he needed concrete evidence to act. Testimonies alone wouldn't be enough. So, he started paying closer attention to Carl's behavior, documenting every incident he witnessed. He noticed patterns. Carl targeted newer employees, those with medical issues, or anyone he perceived as weak. He also manipulated schedules to force people into overtime, knowing they couldn't afford to refuse. One evening, as Jonathan prepared to leave, he overheard Carl berating Sarah in the storage area. Her voice trembled as she explained that she still wasn't fully recovered and needed lighter duties. Carl responded with venom, accusing her of laziness and threatening to fire her if she didn't pick up the pace. Unable to stay silent, Jonathan stepped forward. Pretending to review inventory lists, he interrupted casually. "Excuse me, Mr. Dawson. Can you clarify these figures for me? I'm having trouble reconciling them." Carl froze, his glare shifting from Sarah to Jonathan. For a moment it seemed like he might explode. But then, realizing he couldn't afford to alienate an auditor, even a fake one, he backed off reluctantly. Fine, Carl growled. But make it quick. Once Carl was gone, Sarah turned to Jonathan, her eyes wide. With gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't know what to do. You're welcome, Jonathan replied softly. Just hang in there. Things are going to change soon. As he walked away, Jonathan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The pieces were coming together, and he was closer than ever to exposing Carl's toxic reign. But he also knew the hardest part was yet to come. Convincing corporate leadership to take action and ensuring justice for the workers would require courage, strategy, and proof beyond doubt. And Jonathan was ready to deliver. All three. The days that followed were a delicate balancing act for Jonathan. Each morning he arrived at the warehouse determined to gather more evidence against Carl Dawson without raising suspicion. But Carl was no fool. Over time, his sharp eyes began to notice Jack Miller lingering too long in certain areas or asking too many questions. It wasn't just curiosity, it was interference, and Carl didn't like it one bit. One afternoon, while pretending to review inventory records near the loading dock, Jonathan overheard Carl shouting at Sarah Bennett again. She had returned to, work only weeks earlier after recovering from pneumonia, but her strength hadn't fully returned. Her hands shook as she struggled to lift a heavy box onto a conveyor belt. Carl stormed over, his face red with anger. What's wrong with you? He barked, grabbing her arm roughly. Can't handle this? Maybe you shouldn't be here. Sarah winced, tears welling up in her eyes. Please, Mr. Dawson, I'm doing my best. I'm still not feeling well. Not my problem, Carl snapped. If you can't keep up, maybe you should find another job. Jonathan's fists clenched, under his clipboard. He wanted nothing more than to step in and defend Sarah, but he knew he couldn't reveal his true identity yet. Instead, he took a deep breath and approached them casually, pretending to focus on his notes. Excuse me, Mr. Dawson, Jonathan said calmly. I need clarification on these shipment logs. Could you spare a moment? Carl turned toward him, his expression darkening. For a second, it seemed like he might lash out, but then he forced a tight smile. What do you want now, Miller? It's just a quick question, Jonathan replied, keeping his tone light. These numbers don't match the manifests. Can you explain the discrepancy? Carl hesitated, clearly annoyed but unwilling to risk upsetting an auditor, even if he suspected Jack wasn't who he claimed to be. With a frustrated sigh, he released Sarah's arm and stepped closer to Jonathan. Fine. Let's get this over with. As Carl walked away, Sarah gave Jonathan a grateful look. Thank you, she whispered softly before hurrying off to finish her task. Jonathan nodded silently, his mind racing. This confrontation was proof enough. Carl's behavior wasn't just unprofessional, it was dangerous. Someone could get hurt if this continued. Later that evening, during a break, Jonathan met Lisa in the break room. She sat alone, sipping coffee and staring blankly at the wall. When she saw him approach, she offered a weak smile. How's it going, Jack? She asked tiredly. I've seen enough, Jonathan replied, sitting down across from her. Carl's bullying people, threatening them, even tampering with schedules and attendance records. We need to stop him. Lisa nodded grimly. I know. But how? If we report him, he'll deny everything. And anyone who speaks out will lose their job, or worse. We need proof, Jonathan said firmly. Something undeniable. Documents, recordings, anything that shows what he's really like. Lisa frowned, thinking. After a moment, she leaned closer. There might be something. Carl keeps a private office near the back of the warehouse. He uses it to review employee files, but I've heard rumors that he stores incriminating stuff there. Notes, altered records, maybe even emails. If we could get access. Jonathan's pulse quickened. Breaking into Carl's office was risky, but it might be their only chance. Do you think you can help me get in? Lisa hesitated, clearly torn. Finally, she sighed. All right, but We have to be careful. If Carl catches us, he won't, Jonathan interrupted. Not if we plan this right. That night, after most of the workers had gone home, Jonathan and Lisa put their plan into action. They waited until Carl left the warehouse for his usual late-night cigarette break, leaving his office door slightly ajar. Heart pounding, Jonathan slipped inside while Lisa kept watch outside. The office was small and cluttered, with papers scattered across the desk and shelves lined with binders. Jonathan moved quickly, scanning the documents for anything useful. At first, it seemed hopeless, just routine reports and memos. But then, tucked away in a drawer, he found a folder labeled Employee Disciplinary Actions. Inside were handwritten notes detailing Carl's threats and manipulations, along with falsified attendance records and performance reviews designed to justify firings. Jonathan's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. This was exactly what they needed. He pulled out his phone and began taking photos of the documents, ensuring he captured every detail. Just as he finished, he heard footsteps approaching. Panicking, he shoved the folder back into the drawer and rushed out of the office, narrowly avoiding Carl, who walked past without noticing him. Back in the safety of the break room, Jonathan showed Lisa what he'd found. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the images. "This is incredible," she whispered. "With this, we can take him down." But their victory was short-lived. The next day, Carl seemed unusually alert, his gaze sweeping over the warehouse. With hawk-like precision, midway through the shift, he cornered Jonathan near the storage racks. "You've been snooping around a lot lately, Miller," Carl said coldly, his arms crossed. "What are you really looking for?" Caught off guard, Jonathan forced a calm expression. "Just doing my job, Mr. Dawson. Corporate sent me to ensure everything's running smoothly." Carl sneered. "Funny, because I've heard rumors about someone poking around where they don't belong. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Jonathan shrugged nonchalantly. "No idea. But if you're worried, maybe you should talk to HR." For a moment, Carl stared at him, his jaw tightening. Then, with a dismissive wave, he turned and walked away. Though he hadn't caught Jonathan red-handed, it was clear he was suspicious. Time was running out. That evening, Jonathan confided in Kevin and Sarah, sharing some of the evidence he'd gathered. Both were shocked and relieved that someone finally cared enough to fight back. "We're with you," Kevin said firmly. "Whatever you need, we'll help." Sarah nodded. "Me too. No one deserves to be treated like this." With their support, Jonathan finalized his plan. He reached out to Apex Industries' corporate headquarters, arranging a surprise visit to the warehouse the following week. Armed with testimonies, photos, and irrefutable proof of Carl's misconduct, he prepared to expose the truth, not just about Carl, but about the toxic culture festering within the company. As he drove home that night, Jonathan felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. The hardest part was still ahead, but he knew he wasn't alone. Together, he and the workers had taken the first step toward justice. And when the day came, Carl Dawson would finally face the consequences of his actions. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than anyone expected. Jonathan had spent the entire weekend preparing for what he knew would be the most important moment of his undercover mission. He reviewed every document, rehearsed every conversation, and double-checked that all evidence was organized and ready to present. By Monday morning, he felt as prepared as he could be, but nerves still gnawed at him as he drove to the warehouse. When he arrived, something felt different. The air seemed heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. Workers moved quietly, their faces etched with worry. Even Lisa, who usually greeted him with a small smile, looked pale and anxious. "What's wrong?" Jonathan asked, lowering his voice as they stood near the loading dock. "It's Carl," Lisa whispered. "He's been acting strange all morning. I think he knows something's up." Jonathan frowned. "Did he say anything?" "No, but he keeps watching everyone like a hawk. And he's made 2 calls already. To HR and someone higher up, I think. This wasn't good. If Carl had tipped off corporate leadership, it could complicate things. But Jonathan couldn't afford to back down now. Today was the day everything changed, for better or worse. As the morning wore on, Jonathan kept his head down, pretending to focus on his clipboard, while secretly observing Carl. The foreman paced back and forth, his expression dark and suspicious. Occasionally, he'd stop to bark orders at nearby workers, but his heart didn't seem to be in it. Instead, his eyes darted around the warehouse, lingering on Jonathan more than once. At exactly 10 a.m., a black SUV pulled into the parking lot outside the warehouse. Out stepped 3 people, 2 men in suits and a woman carrying a briefcase. They were accompanied by a security guard, whose presence sent ripples of unease through the workers. Jonathan recognized them immediately. They were senior executives and HR representatives from Apex Industries' corporate office. Carl hurried over to greet them, his demeanor shifting instantly from hostile to overly polite. "Good morning," he said with forced cheerfulness. "Welcome to our facility. How can I assist you today?" One of the executives, a tall man with graying hair, nodded curtly. "We're here to conduct an inspection. Mr. Hayes will explain further." Before Carl could respond, another figure emerged from behind the group. It was Jonathan, or rather, Jonathan Hayes, dressed in his usual tailored suit and tie. His transformation from Jack Miller to CEO was complete, and the shock on Carl's face was priceless. "Mr. Dawson," Jonathan said smoothly, stepping forward. "I believe you've met my assistant during his recent visit." Carl's mouth dropped open. For a moment, he just stared, unable to process what was happening. Then his face turned bright red. You're not—" "I'm Jonathan Hayes," Jonathan interrupted, his tone firm. "And I've been undercover."
"Here for the past week gathering information about this facility and your leadership."
The workers gasped audibly, their eyes darting between Jonathan and Carl. Some looked confused, others relieved, but all were riveted by the unfolding drama. Without waiting for a response, Jonathan turned to the executives and gestured toward the warehouse floor. "Shall we begin the tour?" For the next hour, Jonathan led the group through the facility, pointing out issues he'd observed during his time undercover. He highlighted unsafe working conditions, inefficient processes, and most importantly, the toxic culture perpetuated by Carl's behavior. At each stop, workers bravely stepped forward to share their experiences, bolstered by the knowledge that Jonathan had their backs. Kevin recounted how Carl threatened to fire him for taking time off to care for his sick mother. Sarah described being mocked and belittled when she returned from medical leave. Others spoke of falsified records, excessive overtime demands, and verbal abuse. Each story added weight to Jonathan's case, painting a damning picture of Carl's reign. Throughout the tour, Carl tried to defend himself, insisting that his actions were necessary to maintain productivity. But his excuses fell flat in the face of overwhelming evidence. When Jonathan handed over the photos and documents he'd gathered from Carl's office, the foreman's protests turned into stammers. Finally, one of the executives, a stern woman with sharp features, spoke up. "Mr. Dawson, based on what we've seen and heard today, we have no choice but to terminate your employment effective immediately." Carl's face went white. "You can't do this. This is a setup." "It's not a setup," Jonathan interjected, calmly. "It's justice. You've abused your power, endangered your team, and tarnished the reputation of this company. Your behavior is unacceptable." With that, the security guard escorted Carl out of the warehouse, leaving behind a stunned silence. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, the workers began to cheer. Applause erupted, growing louder until it echoed throughout the building. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she hugged Kevin, while Lisa wiped her eyes and smiled for the first time in weeks. After the initial celebration died down, Jonathan addressed the group. "Thank you all for having the courage to speak out," he said sincerely. "What happened here shouldn't have been allowed to continue, and I take full responsibility for not catching it sooner. Moving forward, we're going to make changes, not just here, but across the entire company." He outlined several immediate steps: improved safety measures, revised scheduling policies to prevent burnout, and enhanced support systems for employees dealing with health issues. He also promised to create an anonymous reporting system so workers could flag problems without fear of retaliation. As the meeting concluded, many employees approached Jonathan to thank him personally. Kevin shook his hand firmly, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. You saved us." "It's my job to protect you," Jonathan replied, "and I won't forget that again." Later that evening, as Jonathan sat in his car reflecting on the day's events, he felt a mix of emotions: pride, relief, and a renewed sense of purpose. Going undercover had been risky, but it had revealed truths that might otherwise have remained hidden. More importantly, it had reminded him why he started Apex Industries in the first place: to build a company where people mattered. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding trust and reforming corporate culture would take time and effort. But as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, Jonathan knew change was possible. And for the first time in a long while, he felt truly hopeful about the future. In the weeks following Carl Dawson's dismissal, the warehouse underwent a dramatic transformation. Jonathan Hayes kept his promise to the employees, implementing changes that addressed their concerns and improved working conditions. New safety protocols were introduced, ensuring that heavy lifting was done with proper equipment and supervision. Schedules were adjusted to reduce overtime and allow for better work-life balance. Most importantly, a zero-tolerance policy for workplace harassment was established, giving employees peace of mind. Jonathan also created an anonymous hotline where workers could report issues without fear of retaliation. To encourage transparency, he held regular town hall meetings at the warehouse, inviting everyone to voice their opinions and suggestions. At first, the workers were hesitant, unsure if this newfound openness would last. But as Jonathan listened attentively and acted on their feedback, trust began to rebuild. One of the biggest changes came in the form of Lisa Carter's promotion. Recognizing her leadership skills and dedication, Jonathan appointed her as the new shift supervisor. It was a decision welcomed by the entire team, who saw Lisa as someone who truly understood their struggles. With her in charge, morale soared. She worked closely with HR to ensure fair treatment for all employees, and became a trusted advocate for those still recovering from Carl's toxic influence. Kevin Rogers also found relief after years of hardship. Thanks to Jonathan's reforms, he was able to cut back on double shifts and spend more time caring for his sick mother. The company even helped him enroll in a financial assistance program designed to ease medical expenses. For the first time in months, Kevin felt like he could breathe again. Sarah Bennett returned to full health under the new policies, which included flexible hours and access to counseling services. Her gratitude toward Jonathan was immense, but she wasn't alone. Many workers expressed their appreciation in small ways, whether it was a kind word during breaks or homemade cookies left on his desk. Despite these successes, Jonathan knew the journey was far from over. Cleaning up one warehouse was just the beginning. The problems exposed by Carl's behavior highlighted deeper systemic issues within Apex Industries. Determined to make lasting change, Jonathan launched a company-wide initiative called New Beginnings. Its goal was simple: to create a workplace culture built on respect, empathy, and collaboration. The initiative included mandatory training sessions for managers on ethical leadership and conflict resolution. Employees were encouraged to participate in workshops focused on mental health awareness and stress management. Jonathan even brought in external consultants to review operational practices and identify areas for improvement. Every step of the how way, he emphasized the importance of listening to employees' voices. To celebrate the progress made so far, Jonathan organized a special event at the warehouse. He rented chairs and set up a small stage near the loading dock, decorating the space with banners and balloons. When the day arrived, nearly every worker showed up, eager to see what the occasion was about. Standing on the makeshift stage, Jonathan addressed the crowd. His tone was warm and sincere as he spoke. "Thank you all for coming today, and thank you for your hard work and resilience over the past few months. What happened here wasn't right, and I deeply regret that it took me going undercover to fully understand the challenges you face daily." He paused, scanning the faces before him. Some nodded in agreement while others smiled softly, moved by his words. "But we've turned a corner," Jonathan continued. "Together we've started building something better, not just for this warehouse, but for our entire company. And I want you to know that I'm committed to keeping this momentum going." Applause erupted, filling the warehouse with energy. Lisa stepped forward next, sharing her thoughts on the positive changes she'd witnessed firsthand. Then Kevin and Sarah joined her, each expressing their gratitude and optimism for the future. By the end of the speeches, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Afterward, food trucks arrived offering free meals to everyone. Laughter filled the air as workers mingled, sharing stories and enjoying the rare moment of celebration. Jonathan wandered among them, shaking hands and thanking people individually. Though he was the CEO, he felt more connected to his employees than ever before. A reminder that leadership wasn't about power, but about service. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the warehouse windows, Jonathan took a moment to reflect. Going undercover had been a risky move, but it had taught him invaluable lessons about humility, courage, and accountability. More than anything, it reinforced his belief that businesses succeed not because of profits or products, but because of people, their talent, effort, and humanity. Looking around the room, he saw hope in action. Workers who once feared speaking up now laughed freely. Those who had carried invisible burdens walked taller, lighter. Even Lisa, always so reserved, beamed with confidence as she coordinated cleanup efforts alongside her team. Jonathan knew challenges lay ahead. Change wasn't easy, and old habits sometimes lingered longer than anyone liked. But standing there, surrounded by smiles and renewed determination, he felt certain they could overcome anything, as long as they stood together. That night, as he drove home, Jonathan allowed himself a rare moment of pride. He thought about the workers he'd met, the stories they'd shared, and the strength they'd shown in fighting for justice. They weren't just employees, they were family. And like any good leader, Jonathan vowed to protect and support them, no matter what. For the first time in years, Jonathan Hayes slept soundly, knowing he had done the right thing. The road ahead would require vigilance, patience, and unwavering commitment. But as long as he kept putting people first, he believed Apex Industries and its workers would thrive, and that he realized was the greatest success of all. Months passed since the dramatic events at the warehouse, and Jonathan Hayes found himself reflecting deeply on everything that had happened. The changes he'd implemented weren't just surface-level fixes, they represented a fundamental shift in how Apex Industries operated. What started as an undercover mission to uncover inefficiencies had evolved into something far greater, a commitment to creating a company culture rooted in empathy, fairness, and respect. Jonathan's own perspective had changed too. Before going undercover, he thought he understood what it meant to lead. He believed that success came from making smart decisions, optimizing processes, and delivering results. But walking in the shoes of his employees, experiencing their struggles firsthand, had taught him that true leadership went beyond numbers and spreadsheets. It was about people. Their hopes, fears, dreams, and sacrifices mattered more than any quarterly report ever could. Every morning as he walked into his office, Jonathan reminded himself of this lesson. His workspace now reflected his new philosophy. Gone were the cold, impersonal decorations. In their place were photos of employees, awards recognizing team achievements, and motivational quotes about service and humility. Even the framed poster on his wall, "Leadership is Service," served as a daily reminder of why he did what he did. Despite the progress, Jonathan knew there was still work to be done. Change didn't happen overnight, especially in a company as large as Apex Industries. While the warehouse had become a model of reform, other facilities across the country still faced challenges. Reports trickled in about similar issues: overworked staff, outdated policies, and managers who prioritized profits over people. Each story weighed heavily on Jonathan, fueling his determination to expand the New Beginnings initiative nationwide. 2. Tackle these problems. Jonathan assembled a task force made up of trusted executives, HR representatives, and even some frontline workers like Lisa Carter. Together, they traveled to different locations, listening to employees' concerns and implementing tailored solutions. At each stop, Jonathan shared his own experience of going undercover, emphasizing the importance of transparency and accountability. One particularly memorable visit took place at a manufacturing plant in Ohio. When Jonathan arrived, he was greeted by skepticism. Workers eyed him warily, unsure if this was another corporate PR stunt. But as he spent time on the floor, rolling up his sleeves and working alongside them, attitudes began to shift. By the end of the week, many approached him privately, sharing stories of frustration and hope. One worker, a single mother named Rachel, summed it up perfectly. "We don't expect perfection, Mr. Hayes. We just want to feel valued." Those words stayed with Jonathan long after he left Ohio. They echoed in his mind during late-night strategy sessions and early morning meetings. Feeling valued. It sounded so simple, yet it was something so many companies failed to provide. For Jonathan, it became the guiding principle of his leadership moving forward. Back at headquarters, Jonathan worked tirelessly to embed this philosophy into every aspect of Apex Industries. Training programs were revamped to emphasize emotional intelligence and communication skills. Performance evaluations no longer focused solely on output. Instead, they included metrics for teamwork, mentorship, and employee satisfaction. Bonuses were tied not only to financial targets, but also to improvements in workplace culture. Even customers noticed the difference. With happier employees came better service, higher quality products, and stronger relationships. Sales increased steadily, proving that investing in people wasn't just the right thing to do. It was good business. Still, Jonathan remained humble. He knew that credit belonged to the workers themselves, the ones who had endured hardships and fought for change. Without their courage, none of this would have been possible. To honor their contributions, he established an annual award called the Apex Spirit Award, given to individuals or teams who exemplified resilience, integrity, and compassion. The first recipients? Lisa Carter, Kevin Rogers, and Sarah Bennett. The ceremony was held in the same warehouse where it all began. This time, however, the atmosphere was joyful rather than tense. Hundreds of employees gathered to celebrate, cheering loudly as Lisa, Kevin, and Sarah accepted their awards. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she hugged Jonathan tightly, whispering, "Thank you for believing in us." As the evening drew to a close, Jonathan stood on the stage one last time. Holding the microphone, he gazed out at the crowd, his heart swelling with gratitude. "When I started this journey," he began, "I thought I was here to fix a problem. Instead, I discovered something much bigger, a family. Each of you has taught me what it means to persevere, to care, and to lift others up. You are the heart of this company, and I am honored to stand beside you." The applause that followed was thunderous, lasting several minutes. As Jonathan stepped down from the stage, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He hadn't just transformed Apex Industries, he had grown as a person, learning lessons that would stay with him forever. In the months and years that followed, Jonathan continued to champion the values of empathy and integrity. Under his leadership, Apex Industries flourished, earning recognition as one of the best places to work in America. Employees described it as a company where they felt seen, heard, and appreciated, a rarity in today's fast-paced world. For Jonathan, the journey was never truly finished. There would always be new challenges, new opportunities to grow, but as long as he stayed grounded in the belief that leadership was about serving others, he knew he couldn't go wrong. And so, with renewed purpose and a heart full of gratitude, Jonathan Hayes embraced the future, not as a CEO but as a servant leader dedicated to making a difference one person at a time.